Welcome to Planning with Purpose.
Hey everyone, welcome back to an all-new episode of Planning with Purpose with attorney Deb Morneau of Courteous Law PC out in Henniker, New Hampshire. I am your host, Mike Leon. Deb has spent more than 2 decades helping families, retirees, and small business owners put plans in place that bring real peace of mind. And in today's episode, we're going to give them a little bit more peace of mind, talking about how to properly fund a trust. Deb's going to break it down in just a second. Deb, it's so good to see you. Let me ask you real quick here at the high level for everybody listening. Someone creates a revocable living trust. What is it? What does it mean to fund it? Why is this step so important for the plan so that way it works the way they expect?
Thanks, Mike. So it's really good to be here, and funding your trust is hugely important. I describe a trust as a basket where you put all your assets into, and at the time you pass, that basket just goes right to your heirs. So the most important thing to do is to put all the assets in the basket. And what that means is to put the house in. So that happens via a deed. So in New Hampshire, we typically use a quitclaim deed. Then it means to go to the bank, put your bank accounts in, your car in, your any asset that has a title. So RVs, boats, all those kinds of things. So getting them in is important because if you don't, then they have to go through the probate process, which is what we're trying to avoid in the first place.
We're always trying to avoid probate. That's the one thing I've always learned is the common through line. But Deb, let's stay on the asset funding part. You mentioned the house, you mentioned bank accounts. What else? Or what other assets need attention for that?
So really, it's everything that doesn't have a beneficiary designation. So you could put things in that have a beneficiary designation, but we're talking, house, vehicles, bank accounts, investment accounts, stocks, bonds, really anything that you have that's an asset needs to go in. Technically, the sofa goes in and the kitchen dishes go in. However, we do that just via a schedule in the trust, and it just says, I put all my personal property in the trust. So that part is easy. The stuff that's not as easy, I mean, it's still pretty easy, but it's just, house, bank accounts, things like that, cars. We can talk about how to do that.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you on the house front, because obviously that's often the family's biggest asset. So what are some details that tend to get overlooked in terms of putting the house into a trust?
Sure. So some of the funny little things that I see sometimes are um, people that maybe they don't even know where their deed is. So we have to do a little registry of deeds digging. Some folks actually have more than one parcel. So that's happened a few times lately where somebody says, oh, yeah, and I also own the parcel next door. Well, that is important because if we don't put the parcel next door into the trust, that's important. Some things that happen too are folks have vacation homes or camps. Some of them can be located in other states, so we have to get help in a different state to put that piece of property in the trust. Really, those are the big things, making sure that the deed is drafted correctly. So we want to make sure if there's an easement in there or a right of way, you got to make sure that those are preserved when you're drafting the deed.
Yeah. Deb, if we go back a second on the retirement plans and the life insurance stuff, because obviously I know that that works differently. Just me, myself, I've designated my wife, right, as a beneficiary. Um, I want to talk a little bit more about how those fit into a trust-based plan, but do they cause unnecessary tax or paperwork issues because of the beneficiary designations?
So there are two sort of ways that you can deal with things with beneficiaries. I typically tell clients if you have a beneficiary designation, let that do the transfer. So if you have life insurance, let the beneficiary take at the point where you pass. However, if life insurance is your biggest asset and you have people who are minor children or folks who have special needs, and you're really hoping that your trust is not just an avenue to pass things along right at death and as soon as things are, bills are cleared and money gets distributed, but you're hoping that that trust lives a little longer, maybe sees children through, age 25 or something like that, then the trust is the beneficiary of the life insurance. There can be tax implications. Any income that a trust earns, so after you've passed, the trust gets its own tax ID number. So any income that the trust earns will be taxed. So That's where that comes in. Same with retirement. Typically, it's most beneficial for retirement to pass right to a beneficiary, but it can be different if you're talking about children, folks under 18 or somebody with a special need. So really, those plans are super tailored for someone's situation. So we want to make sure you know who's going to inherit. And it's also really important that your beneficiary designations, most folks do put, just to my spouse, or to a sibling, or, if they're not married, a friend, however it goes. But you want to make sure there's a secondary beneficiary in case you and your beneficiary are in a mutual accident. You want to make sure there's a backup line of beneficiaries as well.
Yeah. Deb, I'm sure you've got some horror stories or maybe some success stories out there, but I want to ask you specifically on the horror stories one. Is there an example you've come across where maybe a trust wasn't funded the way the person thought it was? And then what did that mean for the family later on?
Sure. So I have two of those happening right now where we're probating just single assets. So the trust did the majority of the job. However, people forgot to put some things in. One asset that was forgotten in a case of mine was a bank account. It's just about, I don't know, maybe $4,000 or $5,000, but that is just enough to not want to leave sitting around and just have that go to the state. So it made sense to open a probate. And it was just sort of the last lingering detail. And the family's like, oh, we have everything done. Oh, but we don't. There's an account that we forgot. And sometimes, really and truly, the issue is that you don't know the account exists because the person that passed, maybe they weren't married, or their spouse has already passed, and people just don't know where the accounts are. So that can be a piece of the story. The other one is a car. Somebody, the car had not been paid off, and then the child who was inheriting the car actually paid the final bill out of their own resources, get the title, and of course the title is in the name of the decedent, so we had to probate that. I'm not sure that was completely avoidable, but I did sort of think, well, why did you do that? Why did you just pay that right off instead of waiting to see if there were estate assets to do it with? But things like that happen. Everything else passed in that case by a trust. So,
Mhm.
it's not terrible process, but it's just more time to get everything, cleared up for people.
So, Deb, let's piggyback on that. So, let's say someone created a trust years ago and they're unsure right now, listening to you, if it's ever been fully funded. Like, what kind of review should they request? What information should they start to gather?
So it's a really good question. So, and actually people's situations change over time too. Could be that their trust was fully funded when they created it, but, time has passed and they've purchased things, opened other accounts. So I say to everybody, just come in, we'll sit down and we'll just start talking about what you have. What kind of, where's the house? Where's the property? Do you have a tractor that's licensed to drive on the road? Do you have an RV? Do you have a camp? Do you have timeshare? That's always an interesting one. Do you have other assets, bank accounts, retirement accounts, investments? Bitcoin, are there things, and lots of folks are like, I'm dabbling in Bitcoin. That's great. However, if the chain, the keychain is not somewhere where somebody can find it, that makes it really, really hard. So there's a lot of assets. We just go through them and just talk about them and make a little checklist and make sure that everything's in. And if it's not in, then we figure out what we need to do.
Yeah. Let me ask you on, I'm sure there's some misconceptions out there people have about changing the titles, making updates. It's going to cause some type of disruption in their life. What would you want them to kind of understand about how funding the trust, it doesn't really affect, or maybe it does affect how they use these accounts?
It doesn't really affect a whole lot. I say it's much easier than you think. The only spot where I think it's maybe a little bit of a pain is with some of the banks. So some banks are amazing. You walk in, you take your certification of trust, and you say, hey, I made a trust. Let's put my accounts in. And the bank goes, sure, we'll just change the signature card. That's the easy one. Some banks, some credit unions are especially a little bit fussy. And the credit union goes, no, I'm not going to change the account. You have to open a new one. I tell everybody, yes, that's a pain in the rear end. However, if that's the bank you want to stick with, open the new account. Eventually kind of move your funds over to the new account, move your auto payments to the new account. that can be a little bit of a sticky wicket, but at the same time, it makes sense to just do it. And if you decide that you don't want to do that, you could make that account payable on death to the trust. So the trust could be sort of a beneficiary of that account. That's a little bit more, it's not the best way to do it, but it certainly could avoid having to open a new account if that's really a problem for the person that made the trust. But it doesn't really interrupt your life that much.
Well, that's good to know. And Deb, as we kind of put a bow on this episode, I would love for you, for that listener that's just starting this process, what kind of habits, maybe keeping a checklist, reviewing things every few years. I know you've said that on previous episodes. Like, what are some things that they should start doing so that they make sure that the trust is up to date, all the assets are there? Give them some tips.
Sure. So I think the biggest thing for folks is to keep a running list of where your accounts are, what the account numbers are. Keep this in a safe place. I wouldn't leave it on your kitchen table. However, we have to know, the people that you're trying to benefit need to know where your accounts are. They need to know that you have a Chime account. They need to know that you have an Acorns account, or wherever all these things live. Make sure that they know how to get to them. Folks sometimes have a safety deposit box that nobody knows about. You got to make sure you list that. And frankly, if you don't add another name to that safe deposit box, then you actually have to probate the silly thing. So you got to make sure to add a name to it. So making sure that there's just a running list. I tell folks every so often, print out a statement from, your investment. Usually you get a quarterly statement, put that in your estate planning binder or notebook or a file folder, wherever you keep your important documents, put those all together. A running list of passwords. I know everyone's like, well, I have a chain on my Apple, whatever, to keep my passwords. That's great. But if nobody knows how to get into that Apple device, then you can't get the passwords. And frankly, if you have a car accident and your phone dies with you, then, having passwords only on an electronic device makes them inaccessible. So, yes, is it maybe a little risky to have them, in the drawer in your file cabinet? But at this day and age, I'm actually not sure that's more risky. That might be the less risky place to have things. So just keeping track of your stuff, putting them in a place where people know where to go look. I have some folks, they're like, it's in a safe. That's great. If nobody knows how to get in your safe, that's also a problem. So just kind of thinking through what if I'm not here, where do people find it, and how can they access the assets and the information?
What if I'm not here? You should be asking yourself that. I love it. Deb, thank you for the time, the insights, and breaking this all down for the audience. I appreciate it.
Hey, no problem. Thanks. It was great to be here.
That's it for today's episode of Planning with Purpose. If you'd like help reviewing your current documents or making sure your trust is properly funded, do me a favor, visit courteouslaw.com right now to connect with Deb and her team. Thanks again for listening, but one more favor, hit like, hit subscribe, leave a review, comment, share the episode with someone who needs to hear it. I'm Mike Leon. We'll see everybody next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.